When I was in high school, I had an appointment that made me late for gym class one day. When I entered the locker room to change my clothes, I noticed one of my classmates. He'd stolen a master key from a coach and excused himself from the exercises and stole money while the class was in session. Silence felt easier. Speaking up felt costly. I knew that as that moment passed, I wouldn't feel relief. I would feel regret if I didn't speak. Silence, though comfortable in the moment, often leaves the deepest mark. I couldn't let it go, so I nervously turned him in to the Dean of Boys. Greetings, Patriots. I'm Perry Greene. Welcome to God in America, where faith and freedom flow from obedience to God rather than from the approval of men. You might be able to tell from the background that I'm still unpacking after my move to Iowa. I've recorded several podcasts in advance, but I want to address some things, so I'm adding one this week. Today, we're talking about a subject that cuts close to home: the cost of Christian silence. This matters because our nation is not only shaped by what its people believe, but by what they're willing or unwilling to say. When conviction fades into quiet, liberty soon disappears with it. Throughout American history, silence has rarely been neutral. In times of moral crisis, it has often functioned as consent. The men and women who shaped this nation understood that truth had to be spoken even when it was unpopular. John Adams warned, "Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people." Knowledge unspoken, however, does little good. Samuel Adams went further, saying it does not require a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. The founders were not reckless agitators, but neither were they quiet when principles were at stake. They believed ordered liberty required moral clarity, and moral clarity required voices willing to speak. History repeatedly shows that when people retreat from truth to preserve comfort, the vacuum is quickly filled by ideas hostile to virtue and freedom. Silence never stops tyranny or oppression. Jesus addressed this reality directly in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16, he said, "You're the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? You're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven." Salt that doesn't preserve is useless. Light that doesn't shine might as well not exist. Notice something important. Jesus says, "Let your light shine," not "make it shine." Speaking truth is not an act of arrogance, it's the natural outflow of a transformed life. Christians are not called to manufacture outrage or seek conflict, but neither are we called to hide conviction under the basket of cultural approval. The Apostle Paul reminds us that none of us stands on moral high ground by merit. In 1 Corinthians 6, verse 11, after listing many sins, he writes, "And such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ." Grace produces humility, but humility does not require silence. Here's the faith and freedom truth. We must remember God-given liberty requires moral responsibility, and moral responsibility requires courage rooted in truth. Christians today face a choice, as do believers in every age. Will we bend to pressure for the sake of peace or stand with God for the sake of faithfulness? Paul asked the question plainly in Galatians 1, verse 10. He said, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." And again in 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, we speak not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. God evaluates faithfulness, not applause. Men judge appearances. God examines allegiance. We can and must speak the truth in love, not to win arguments, but to bear witness, not to condemn, but to call people toward the grace that saves us. Thanks to Nick Shirley, Americans have seen billions of tax dollars stolen in Minnesota by the Somalians. We observe the organized resistance to ICE in their removal of illegals, that is, lawbreakers, from our country. When Don Lemons and his crew of anarchists disrupted the city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota on January the 18th, 2026, most Americans were outraged and began speaking out. Thankfully, Pastor David Easterwood didn't bow to the protesters but stood his ground in the gospel to protect his flock. By the way, what would your shepherd or shepherds have done? Americans are finally speaking. Paul declared in Romans 1, verse 16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. Silence shames. Confidence in God's power emboldens. The time for approval of sin through silence has passed. This is not a call to harshness, but to clarity, not to pride, but to faithfulness, not to withdraw from the world, but to illuminate it. Let us be the salt that preserves and the light that shines steadily, humbly, and without apology. As we close, let's keep the light of faithful courage burning.